This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Now the backs there are. He backs it. He kicks it. Oh, the fall from Dersma. This is the speed of the culture. 3 bounces down the wing. He keeps going. 4 bounces. Joining the chorus. The Can't Lose Kangas are AFLW premiers.
Hello, welcome back once again to North Pod, and I guess a more improved performance this week against Port Adelaide. It's hard to know how to feel because that game was there for the taking. It was an improved performance. Ultimately, we couldn't quite put it together for a win. Had some chances late, but I think we'd all agree that first quarter was really where we lost the game. Look, obviously a much better performance than the last few weeks. Much prefer this to going down by 10 goals plus. But there's always that element of what if, could we have got across the line? What could we have done 5% better? So definitely prefer this. Definitely an improved performance, but yeah, definitely a lot to talk about. So let's dive right into the big talking points. Review time. We're going to run through team selection and the game as a whole. And yeah, the axe was swung at the selection table. Some massive changes, or certainly some surprises, no doubt. So sacked or culled from the side, Aiden Corr and Corr and Logue. So essentially, our first choice key defenders in Corr and Logue. I was surprised to see them both go out at the same time. In particular, I thought Corr was probably a little unlucky. I know he's had a lot of goals kicked on him, but I don't know that he has done a hell of a lot wrong. Obviously, the coaches are seeing something, or seeing more than I am, and seeing a little bit differently. And I'm not about to say that he's been having an amazing game, or an amazing season. But yeah, I thought it was probably a tad harsh and probably a little surprising. Corr and Logue, I think, has been down on form. I think it was probably a fair enough call to have him excluded. That one I'm not going to defend. I think he's struggled coming back from injury, and maybe just needs a little bit of time to get some fitness up and some touch in the twos. So that one I'm probably less surprised about. And then Zach Fisher came out, did his hammy, or it certainly had some hamstring awareness last week. So those were the 3 outs. In comes Callan Dawson to replace one of those key backs, and Jackson Archer, I guess, comes in and plays a little taller than he normally would. Riley Hardeman replacing Zach Fisher. So 3 changes in our defence. Zane Dersma was the substitute. And yeah, I think holistically the fan base is pretty pleased that there were some big name omissions. No doubt there'll be a few other names that I think probably the fans were more looking to see, but you can't axe the entire side. I think it's absolutely fair and reasonable that there's been some changes, and I suspect there'll be some more. Yeah, I think probably Aiden Corr will find his way back into the side, or certainly one of these two are going to find their way back into the side throughout the year. I think this is definitely not the last we're going to see of them. I thought Callan Dawson came in and played on Georgiades and did an okay job. I think he was beaten, but he wasn't firmly beaten or soundly beaten. And I thought Riley Hardeman, I was super excited for him to come in and play a full game. We've seen him be substitute, we've seen him be dropped, and I thought it was important that he came in and had a full game to ply his trade. I guess the other thing worth mentioning in the selected side, Luke Parker was playing his 300th game. So obviously, 5 or 6 or 7 for North Melbourne now, but played a long time at the Swans. And yeah, it's one of those ones where it's almost hard to believe. It's kind of weird seeing him playing for us. I remember at his absolute prime just thinking, he was probably top 5, top 10 of the competition in his prime. Just one of those absolutely reliable grunt players that, we would have loved to have. We've had players like him over the journey. I think Ben Cunnington plays, a similar kind of in and under role, but I think Luke Parker's probably a little bit better on the outside, kicked more goals than Cunners did. Anyway, it's not about comparing him to Cunnington, but, he's a player that I've really admired from afar, Luke Parker. It's been strange seeing him play in North Melbourne colours, but great that he could bring up the 300. Sam Reid and a few of his other old Sydney mates were there to cheer him on and to support him, which was fantastic. And then, we head to the score, and disappointing loss, but a much better result than previous weeks. So Port Adelaide win 14-13-97 over us, 13-10-88. So 9-point winners in the end, Port Adelaide. We just weren't quite able to get that margin to under a goal. We hovered around the 2 to 3 goals down, got it back to around about a goal, but weren't quite able to put that immense pressure on Port. I guess going through the game now, some early matchups or some matchups that I guess I noticed from the jump that were pretty crucial. So I spoke about Callum Dawson on Georgiades. He was really their focal point up forward. They have Ollie Lord there, and Jeremy Finlayson came on as the sub, but Georgiades is the experienced focal point up there. So Callum Dawson had his work cut out for him. Chom was playing on Lord, and so I guess probably the hope there was that Ollie Lord, as the more inexperienced forward, Chom might be able to work off him and do some intercepting. Didn't really eventuate, but I suspect that was the plan. Jackson Archer came in and played on Willie Rioli, and I thought, played a pretty solid game. Rioli wasn't able to have too much of an impact, but definitely that's the great flexibility of Jackson Archer, is that he can play a taller role, play a more marking type player, but he can also play a small. That's probably the role that Luke McDonald would have played sort of 2 or 3 years ago. Jackson Archer, I think, at this point is definitely a better fit for that. And then Darcy Tucker was trying to play on Connor Rosie. Rosie's playing that halfback role. He's played a little bit this year, and boy, we will talk about that. That one certainly did not work out for us. And we saw in the middle, Luke Parker and George Wardlaw both kind of spending some time on Jason Horne-Francis. That battle really fired up as the game went on. We'll talk about the moment, I'm sure you've no doubt seen, or if you didn't watch the game, it's all over social media. There's a couple of moments involving the Hornets that are there to talk about. But, I think looking at those matchups, I was pretty happy with most of them. The Tucker one certainly didn't work out, but I think the other ones, for the most part, worked out pretty well for us. Early days, it looked like we were going to be okay. The first part of that, the first half of that first quarter, I thought, there were some good things, there were some bad things, but it wasn't danger signs early on. We saw a turnover pretty early that Port went end to end and ended in Darcy Byrne-Jones taking uncontested mark. That's going to happen. It's more the frequency with which that typically happens that's upsetting. I thought Xerri created something nice early. He had a really good body spoil after some continued pressure, and that allowed Curtis to win a hold in the ball call. Xerri's an interesting one. He's been really struggling to sustain impact in games, and this game was no different. His numbers weren't big, but when he has those opportunities, he does tend to at least impact. It's not that he's not trying, that's for sure. So it was good to see Xerri having an early impact. McKercher, I thought, looked a little unsteady early on. We've seen that in previous weeks. He was one that I thought potentially could get dropped, but again, we saw him just not being clean, not having that first touch cleanliness that we want to see from those early draft picks, and we certainly saw from Sheesel in his first couple of years. And then I think the moment that probably broke us open a little bit in that first quarter and allowed Port to get on top, Sam Powell-Pepper just burst through two would-be tacklers in Riley Hardeman and Charlie Comben to kick a goal. It wasn't good. I think you're okay with the first tackle being broken, but for him to break two and then kick a goal, that really hurt. And I think for me, that's where he lost a bit of control in that first quarter, where we allowed Port to get on top. They ended up kicking the last 4 goals of that first quarter, and it was partly due to the way they were playing and partly due to our mistakes. Dylan Stevens missed Cam Xerri on an exit kick. We would have been out the back, just missed the kick. That meant that Port scored a late goal, and all of a sudden it's just a massive lead, a 29-point lead, to Port Adelaide at quarter time, and there's danger signs. There's signs that this game could get out of hand again. I thought Luke Parker had a really strong first quarter. I thought he was really good in the clinches, but just the second half of that first quarter, we allowed far too easily for Port Adelaide to score. We're going to quarter time, and we've been a second quarter team for this year. That's been our best quarter so far, and this was no different. I thought we started pretty well, albeit we were rushing at times. We won a 50-metre penalty, and Jakey Gidstani just dumped it long. I think it was either Alia or Radaglia that took an uncontested intercept mark. It's just, you've got to be better than that when we get the ball in the forward half. And we were on the receiving end of several, I thought, generous free kicks or 50-metre penalties. I thought Xerri gets a questionable holding ball call and then gets a 50-metre penalty in goals. We'd burned several chances prior to that, but we were able to at least get on top there. And I thought Xerri had a pretty promising game. Was certainly winning the hit-out battle. Would like to have him have a little bit more impact around the ground, but certainly he'll be in the votes for this week. I thought this was an improved performance for him and was able to get on top of Jordan Sweet for most of the game. There were certainly periods or stages where Jordan Sweet had some good impact, but for the most part, I definitely think Xerri was the better ruck. As the game went on, the Port fans were getting really frustrated with the umpires, and I think, to be fair, there probably were some decisions that went against them, or some 50-50 calls that went against them. A couple of those resulted in goals for us, like that Xerri one that I mentioned. It wasn't the only example. Again, this was one of those quarters where we were our own worst enemy. We were playing well, we kicked a couple of goals, and then we had a turnover. We were running through the middle, a poor hand pass, allowed Port Adelaide to turn it over and kick a goal. And then Port Adelaide missed two absolute sodas. One of them, they just bellied the ball. They were trying to kick a snap, and Horne-Francis kicked a goal from the resulting stoppage anyway. But I think that's the thing that really kept us alive in this game, is that Port Adelaide weren't playing their best. We were playing well in patches and having those lapses that we're familiar with, but Port Adelaide weren't hurting us and damaging us like they did in that first quarter. That allowed us to get some ascendancy and actually kick 5 goals to 2 in this quarter. George Wardlaw had some really nice stoppage work and allowed Parker to kick a goal. Paul Curtis was fantastic, had a really nice chase down tackle. Jason Horne-Francis gave the hand pass off, and Paul Curtis just didn't give up on halfback, won a hole in the ball call, and potentially saved a goal there. He also drew a free kick, which allowed Larky to take a contested mark, and we kicked 2 late goals, which was really nice to see, because we had so much of the play in that second quarter and weren't able to I guess, put it on the scoreboard until late in the quarter. So, like I said, 5-2 second quarter, we go into halftime down by 2 goals, but we've re-established ourselves as back in the game. And then the third quarter happened. Just a really ugly quarter of football from both sides, to be honest. LDU, there was not a lot of scoring early on, and then LDU received a kick in the back half that was maybe 15 metres, maybe not. It was call play on. He didn't really have the time and the sense of mind to make a quick decision, so he got caught and Port Adelaide kicked a goal, which broke the shackles a little bit, allowed them to get some ascendancy in the third quarter, but it was really through weight of numbers. The Port Adelaide goal was on the back of just repeated stoppages and repeated keeping the ball inside their 50. Eventually, it did go up the other end. We were able to get the ball in our 50, and Larky, who was not having a good game, was able to slap it into a really nice spot for Paul Curtis, who kicked it off the ground and kicked one of his 3 goals. He just had a really, really nice game, Paul Curtis. Just kept finding himself in the right spot. If he was marking it higher up the ground, he'd turn quickly and try and find a target, and he was really opportunistic inside 50, kicked 3 goals, and just looked dangerous throughout. I thought he had a really, really nice game. Conversely, Cam Zerha found it really hard to get involved, but he ended up with 2 goals and kicked one of those in the third quarter on the back of some really nice Paul Curtis craft. And then it was a 50-metre fest. There was 50-metre penalties going in either direction. Comically bad errors from both sides. And I think the one that probably sums it up is Sam Powell-Pepper had a shot from the goal square, essentially, uncontested, kicks it really low and flat straight into Chom's hands in the goal square, which just summed it up. It was really alert defending, I guess, from Chom. If you're a junior and you're watching that, you always, even if you think it's going to go straight over your head, Chom had his hands up and he jumped and was able to actually smother what should have been a straightforward goal for Sam Powell-Pepper. Just summed up the sorts of errors that were happening. Even trying to exit defensive 50, Port Adelaide were making some really silly mistakes with their kicking. And it was a bit of a 0-0 draw the third quarter. We went into three-quarter time, 13 points down after pretty much an even quarter. I think probably the big moment in that third quarter, which you would have no doubt seen, was the scuffle. So to sum it up, or to set it up rather, Jai Simpkin has a free kick in the middle of the ground, takes the kick, sort of punts it long inside 50. Jason Horne-Francis was on the mark. So to my mind, I think Simpkin, did his best to avoid Horne-Francis, but Horne-Francis moved towards him a little bit, and then Simpkin said, you know what, I'm going to give you a bit. So I gave him a bit of a bump from behind. Certainly nothing that was, too significant, but it was enough to get Horne-Francis up and about. They exchanged some words. There was a bit of push and shove, and then Horne-Francis really pushed Simpkin into the ground, which created a bit of an all-in Barney, which resulted in a goal for us eventually because there was a 50-metre or a free kick and a 50-metre penalty paid to us. And it was just great to see. I thought it was actually pretty smart by us in terms of the way that we rolled Horne-Francis up. It's this balance between, I think he does play his best footy when he's angry, but he's also able to, or prone to those lapses and in concentration and making a silly mistake. And I think we saw that from him here. Gave away a silly free kick and 50-metre penalty. It was a great shot of Horne-Francis and Xerri just essentially going at it like two bulls. Their heads are, their helmet to head in a bit of an encounter, and that was a really spiteful way to end the last quarter. It was fantastic to watch. It was good theatre. We saw Horne-Francis really struggling to contain himself at three-quarter time. He was yelling at the umpires. He was yelling at North Melbourne players, and it's tough to watch. Sorry, tough is the wrong word. It's entertaining to watch, but then I think we all knew that Horne-Francis was going to come out and have a big last quarter, and I certainly thought he had some impact. He tackled really hard in the last quarter and didn't let his emotions get the better of him. I thought he channeled it really well. So that's where it's like you've got to take what we got at the end of the third quarter and accept that he's going to amp it up in that last quarter. I thought he was really strong. And was one of the reasons that Port Adelaide were able to get on top in clearance in that last quarter, unfortunately. We finally saw the substitute with Dersma coming on for Darcy Tucker. You're not going to believe this. Darcy Tucker had 0 disposals from the 3 quarters that he played. Had 3 tackles, 0 touches. Was absolutely pantsed by Connor Rosie and just was not able to have the impact that he would have wanted. So Dersma came on and did a couple of nice things. Certainly didn't win the game for us or change the game dramatically, but took a couple of nice marks and got himself involved, which is nice to see. That's what you want the substitute to come on. You want him to come on and have an impact. There was another generous 50-metre call, I thought, that resulted in Jack Darling being able to kick a goal from the square. But the last quarter we just got dominated in clearances, but I think we might have lost the first 8 or 9 clearances of that last quarter, which, despite that, we were actually getting some territory. We were losing at the initial contest, and then we were able to get it back heading our way after, the ball was cleared. I thought we were getting it into the right areas, and we had lots of opportunities in the last quarter. Zerha, Constanti, Bekircher all missed chances that, are probably sort of 60 to 70% chances that if they were able to kick, if 2 of those come off, it's probably a different game. There was a crucial moment where Jai Simpkin had a really costly hold in the ball call against him. There had been a really nice handball chain down the wing. Would have been midway through or sort of 2/3 the way through that last quarter. The chain involved Vino Sullivan and McKercher and Dersma. We got the ball to half forward and Simpkin just needed to get the ball on again, whether that was via handball or kick, but unfortunately, he was just too slow with disposal and got caught holding the ball. That one really hurt because that would have potentially got us within a goal and really, put Port Adelaide under pressure. Like I said, missed opportunities. And then the ball ends up in Port Adelaide's forward line, maybe 4 or 5 minutes to go. Willie Rioli puts on a really smart block. It should have been a free kick against Rioli, but that's what happens. He took the risk. He put on a block, blocked Chom from contesting the ball, so Ollie Lord took a mark and kicked a goal from that. It was essentially game over there. We did put up a bit of a fight after that, but that put the game sort of within doubt for Port Adelaide. And that's what happens. We got unlucky. That definitely should have been a free kick, but I thought across the other elements of the game, we probably got the rub of the green, so it's hard to complain about that. Shortly after that, Wardlaw kicked a brilliant snap to keep us just in it from the boundary on his wrong side. It was with his right foot, but the wrong side for a right footer and snaps really nicely to kick a goal. And that was a reward. I think that one is real evidence of if you are able to lock that ball inside forward 50, there's some rewards there because there was repeated stoppages that allowed us to finally kick that goal. I guess the last moment, Nick Larkey missed one from about 50. He did not have a good game, poor Nick. He ended with 1 goal, 2, and had one out in the full as well. Dropped some marks that he would normally take. But this one just missed it from 50. It's not a game breaker. I don't think we would have won the game regardless, but it would have got us in with a chance. Ultimately, we go down by 9 points, probably after wasting a few too many opportunities in that last quarter. But it's one of those games or one of those things where you go, it's disappointing we weren't able to win, no doubt, but at the same time, I think we've got to be a little bit encouraged by the fact that it was a much improved performance. It's a 9-point loss, not an 80-point loss. So, yeah, it's a tough one to summarise how to feel about that, because a lot of positives, but ultimately it's a little bit disappointing that we weren't quite able to get across the line. Yeah, disappointment mixed with satisfaction and laid with a little bit of optimism from some of the performance that we saw, I thought. So, yeah, that is your game review. Time for story of the game, and look, I alluded to it earlier on. I think where this game was won and lost was definitely in that first quarter. Just too many turnover goals, and too easily did we allow Port Adelaide to score. The fact that they kicked the last 4 goals of that quarter to put themselves 29 points up, that's where we lost the game. We had to fight so hard to get ourselves back into the game from that point. If we were able to go into quarter time only get down by 2 goals, the way that we played in that second quarter, we'd have ourselves up at half time, and then it was an arm wrestle after that. We could have kept our noses in front potentially. So the game was won and lost in those moments where we just allowed Port Adelaide to score too easily in that first quarter. And I think in general, we saw the way that they tried to attack our defensive structures. All of Port Adelaide's scoring just came from their desire and want to play on at all costs, play fast ball movement, and put our defensive structures under pressure. And that they were successful in doing that. They hand passed to the player running past at every opportunity. Quite often that was Connor Rosie running off half back. He was instrumental in that, but it was anyone that was running on the way past would receive the hand pass. It was really quick and instinctive from them. I haven't watched too much of them this year, so I'm not sure if that's been the style that they've been implementing against every side, but I certainly know if it wasn't, it was the right way to play against us, because it just meant that as a side, we didn't have any time to drop players back and set up defensively like we'd like to, and it allowed them to get heaps of one-on-ones on our defenders. And we know that in those scenarios we've been exposed regularly this year and in previous years. I guess, again, going back to that Darcy Tucker Connor Rosie matchup, the fact that Tucker wasn't able to even work off Rosie, he wasn't able to hurt him, and he wasn't able to negate him. 3 tackles, 0 disposals for Darcy Tucker. That's a worry. I've not been in the hang Darcy Tucker camp. I've been one that's, I'm sure no doubt there's some things that he does that are really hard for just a regular fan to see. He's obviously playing a role each week, and it's one of those utilities. He's someone that can play on a wing, he can play at half back, he can play at half forward. I think that flexibility is valuable, but this is a new low. This is one of those games where you have to drop him the following week because it's just such a poor performance. It's not to say that he can't work his way back in, but yeah, Connor Rosie had so much influence off halfback, and Darcy Tucker just wasn't able to do anything. Or, I'd take 0 disposals if he's negating Rosie, but that definitely wasn't the case. So has to be replaced next week for me. Anyway, getting back to, I guess, the way that Port played. They got our defenders playing one-on-one. The way that they're able to do that is just their disposal and their kicking was so clean. In comparison to us, we would have missed the 3rd or the 4th, or even the 1st, to be honest, disposal in the chain. But they'd give the hands, that player would take a couple of strides, and they'd find a target, generally uncontested, and they could continue that chain over and over again. Our defence wasn't able to set up and help out. And I guess ultimately that was the way that Port Adelaide were able to cut us apart pretty regularly throughout the game. That speed of movement really hurt. And when they got their game going, when they were able to get the ball deep inside 50, it was generally as a result of them moving the ball really quickly. So yeah, I guess those two things is what lost us the game. We weren't able to slow their ball movement down, and yeah, the second half of that first quarter really hurt us, and unfortunately, I definitely think cost us this game because it's just that one lapse. And I guess it was 4 goals in a row as opposed to some weeks where it's been 6, 7, 8 goals. So potentially that's an improvement, but at some stage we have to start to look at these moments and go, okay, we can't have any moments like that because we're just not a good enough side to win momentum back successfully. Us winning momentum back is generally slogging the game up, slowing it down, and turning it into a bit of a 0-0 draw. I guess you could look at that Melbourne game and the way that we were able to take control of it in the second half. But, that's one game out of the past, 50 where we've been able to do something like that. We just don't regularly damage sides enough, and we're not skillful enough generally to do that. So we can't afford to have these defensive lapses. So unfortunately, after that first quarter, we were able to slow Port Adelaide down. We didn't concede 100 points, which is nice. I think it might be the first time this year, except for the Melbourne game, of course. So the second time for this year. But 97, they got pretty close. And after that first quarter, it looked like they were on track for 120 or 130. So, a disappointing end to that first quarter, but definitely some takeaways from the way that we were playing in that across the game, really, because I think it's easy to see if we are able to slow the opposition down. I think that'll really help our defenders and help the way that we're able to defend as a whole. Shinboner of the week, and for me, it's an easy one this week. It has to be Paul Curtis. I'm gonna give it specifically for his chase down tackle on Willem Drew. After the hand pass from Jason Horne-Francis, I mentioned it earlier on, Willem Drew runs past, gets the handball received, thinks he's got some time to kick it long, potentially launch it from 50 for a goal. Paul Curtis didn't give up. He chased him down, tackled him, won a hole in the ball call, and it was one of a couple for the day. He won another hole in the ball call where unfortunately he concussed the player. Josh Shin is the one I'm trying to think of. It'll be interesting to see. I'm recording this before the tribunal will have made a decision, or rather the match review panel will have made a decision on that. It's one of those ones I could see him getting stamped out for. I really hope he doesn't. There was absolutely nothing untoward in the tackle. It was a little similar to that Patrick Dangerfield chase down from behind we saw, whether that was last year or 2 years ago, where I actually think that Paul Curtis did a good job of not completely falling into his back, but the momentum, they're both running forward, sort of carry Josh Shin forward in the tackle, and he did hit his head and was unfortunately out for the game with concussion. That's one to watch. I don't think, for me, and for the game, I would not like to see that penalised, but I understand the way things are going. There's every chance that happens. All of that is to say, I thought that Paul Curtis had a really good game with his tackling, and he had a really good game in general. He's having an All-Australian performance year at the moment. He's playing super, super well. I think he and Jack Higgins are the only two players that have kicked multiple goals in every game so far this year. He finished the game with 16 disposals, 3 goals, 3 marks, 5 tackles, a goal assist, and 4 inside 50s. And for me, easily our most impactful player on the ground. I guess going to the North Podium voting, I've given him the 3 votes. It wasn't a match-winning performance. We weren't able to win the game, so no 4 votes again in this game. But I couldn't go past Paul Curtis for 3 votes in this game. And then looking to others, it's interesting, there weren't a lot of players in the votes for this week, and I think that speaks to the fact that it was a bit of a slog, this game. There were a lot of errors, a lot of players that weren't quite, or just nearly there, but not quite there in terms of the way they were playing. So Paul Curtis was the only player to receive the 3 votes, and I got a couple of players with the 2 votes. George Wardlaw, I thought, was fantastic when he was on the field. It was good to see him playing. I think he might have played 63% of game time, which is up from 53% last week. Hopefully they can get him to around that 70% mark. Totally happy with them working him back into playing footy. He's had a lot of injuries, so I understand his game time limitations. He had 20 disposals, kicked that amazing goal late that I mentioned, 6 tackles, 2 clearances, 2 goal assists, 7 inside 50s. He's an impact player, and I think the vast majority of his disposals were high impact. I thought his disposal in general was a little better than it was last week. He's always going to be a little haphazard. Like I said last week, he's never going to be a player that is an amazing kicker of the footy, but I thought he was pretty safe and effective with his disposal in this game. And like I said, impactful. Only the 2 clearances, but I thought his work around the stoppages, he was often that player getting the receive from the clearance and then going forward and putting some speed and some distance on the footy. 7 inside 50s is a really nice number for him. And the fact that he was able to sneak forward and kick a goal, a crucial goal in that last quarter, was also fantastic. So 2 really, really nice games from Wardlaw. I think we're sort of seeing him back to the kind of impact that he was having consistently in his first season. I thought last year, with the concussions and second year blues, he was a little bit down, but his first 2 games of the year have been fantastic, and we've certainly been missing this kind of impact from him to start the year. And then I thought Luke Parker in game 300 was also worthy of the 2 votes. 27 disposals, also kicked a goal, 7 marks, 1 contested, 7 tackles. Just did everything right. His disposal of efficiency wasn't fantastic. I think he went at maybe 58%, but a lot of that was because it was quick kicks forward. He was under pressure. He was being tackled as he's kicking it, or he's under pressure the entire time. I thought he was really, really important in the clinches. I mentioned him in that first quarter. I thought was crucial in the way that the game wasn't going our way, but he was a steadier, and he did spend some time on Horne-Francis. The two of them really locked horns at times. They were tackling each other, they were pressuring each other, and yeah, I thought Luke Parker, just again, it's really easy to take a player for him, or a player like him, for granted. He's a superstar of the game, or at least he has been, and I think it's going to be fantastic to see his twilight years in North Melbourne's colours, because he clearly is still near the peak of his powers, even if he's not quite at the peak of them, and good that he was able to go forward and kick another goal. We love midfielders who can kick goals. And then 1 vote, Tristan Xerri and Harry Sheezel have received 1 vote. Xerri, I thought, was one of his better games for the year. He was close to getting a 2-vote performance as well. I just would like to see him do a little bit more around the ground, but I thought he definitely played his role around stoppages. 23 disposals, also a goal, 2 marks, so I'd like to see that pushing up to 3 or 4 marks at least. 3 tackles, 39 hit-outs, definitely won the hit-out battle. 14 of those to advantage, 7 clearances. Yeah, definitely played his role. Won the battle with Jordan Sweet without it being a trouncing like we saw him do at times last year, but a step in the right direction, I think, for him. And then Harry Sheezel, 30 disposals, 4 marks, 1 of those contested, 3 clearances, 5 inside 50s, 600 metres gained. Played his role, spent some time at halfback, spent some time in the middle, was often that one that's sort of playing off halfback but pushes up to be in the middle once the ball's bounced. And I thought, it wasn't a game where he had super high impact, but 600 metres gained, he was getting the ball forward for us and didn't do a lot wrong, was having more of that clean first touch stuff that we've seen from him, at his best. So not one of his best performances, but I think closer to his best for Harry Sheezel and heading in the right direction. And, he's still having a pretty consistent year. You'll find in a minute, he's still on top of the North Podium voting, and he's getting votes in most games. So although, he's probably taken a step back from the form that he was in last year, he's still playing okay, I thought. So reviewing, Paul Curtis 3, 2 votes for Wardlaw and Parker, 1 vote for Xerri and Sheezel, which means that the North Podium standings after round 7 sees a tie in first place. Harry Sheezel and Paul Curtis both on 9 votes. Paul Curtis is having an amazing year, I think, really deserving of being in the early All-Australians calculations. We know it's going to be hard for him to do that in a side that's probably going to finish bottom 4, but the fact that he's kicked multiple goals again, he's been really consistent. So fantastic to see that from him. And Harry Sheezel, like I mentioned, ultra consistent as well. So the two of them on 9 votes. Jai Simpkin on outright second on 7 votes. And then Tom Powell, Nick Larkey, LDU, Luke McDonald and Luke Parker all on 6 votes in equal third. So to speak. Xerri 5, McKercher and Darling on 4 behind them. So it is interesting to, I guess, have a look. We've got some inconsistent performers in there. I'd put Simpkin, Powell, even LDU, who didn't get a vote in this game. I'd put them in the inconsistent basket, but they've had some really nice games as well to get them up there. And we've got the consistent performers, Sheezel, Curtis. I think Luke McDonald's been pretty consistent this season as well. Luke Parker's been consistent. So there's a mix of players who have been up and down and players that have been consistent up there. But I think it's fair to say that we're seeing the cream start to rise to the top, although Jai Simpkin's game left a lot to be desired in this one, and he's been pretty good to start the year, but his last 2 games, we're just seeing moments from him. If I just take a quick pause here, we're seeing moments from him that are just backbreakers. I feel like he has 1 or 2 of them every game where the moment presents itself to him and he's not able to rise that occasion. This one was the hand pass or the kick that he had to get on where he got caught holding the ball. We saw him have that kick smothered a couple of weeks ago. We've seen him miss targets at important times. Unfortunately, in this game, though, I don't think he had a good game in general before that happened. And then he has a mistake like that, it really hurts. It's an interesting one. It's a bit of a watch for me because I thought he started the year strongly, but we're seeing some of those things creep back in where he's symptomatic of us as a side, where he can have some really nice moments but lets himself down at crucial times, and that really, really hurts us. And some of his best work is not always rewarded. And I think that really sums up us as a side at the moment. Our mistakes are really costly. We'll do some really nice things that just aren't quite rewarded because we're not able to finish off our work. Anyway, it's an interesting one. It's going to be also interesting to see how the captaincy is handled in the next couple of years, because Simpkin's got a lot of years left on his clock and on his contract, but I wonder if, similar to Luke McDonald, he'd be better off without that responsibility and we give it to someone else, and that maybe frees him up. Anyway, it's probably a conversation for a different time, but yeah, not a good game from Simpkin. I guess I want to touch on that whilst I was talking about him. Thank you so much for supporting the show and listening to North Pod. I really do appreciate it. I'd really appreciate it if you could share this show with any North Melbourne fans that you know, and subscribe on your chosen podcast service, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you listen. You can get involved with my social media, X, Blue Sky, Instagram, etc. at NorthPod Show. And if you would like to support me in another way, you can find my Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. I appreciate all the support, and I appreciate every listener. You make the show what it is. So thank you for listening to me talk about North Melbourne for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours throughout the year, even though we are not playing good football. It's therapy for me, and I hope it's therapy for you as well. Kanga clipboard time. Got a couple of notes here. Have to start with Nick Larkey. I think there's going to be people, and there's always people that are frustrated with the way that Larkey plays. I think it's a symptom of the type of forward he is. He's not a brute, and so at times he will get out-muscled, particularly if it's a stand and wrestle. And, I think there are some people that just can't accept that think he has to be that real Tom Hawkins type that can out-wrestle anyone. He's not that player. He's a smart player, and he's a player that can get himself into advantageous positions, but he much prefers getting it on the lead, or if it's a pack situation where it's a run and jump, he can take a mark in that scenario. We saw him do that out the back in this game. I'm giving him a mulligan for this one. His kicking, his goal kicking in this one was just off. We know that he is historically one of, if not the most reliable shot on goal in history. He finished with 1 goal, 2 and an out on the full, 12 touches, 7 marks, 2 goal assists. I think he did his best while he was struggling to finish his work. It wasn't a game that he's going to look back on with any great fondness, but I mentioned that tap on to Paul Curtis, which was super crucial. He took a really nice contested mark and then went and kicked it from the goal square because he knew that his radar was a little bit off. And then, he spilt some marks that he'd usually take. So he just had an off game, Nick Larkey. Radaglia was pretty good at using his body and spoiling Larkey and not giving him that run and jump at the footy. And I thought it was a great contest to watch as a neutral. Unfortunately for us, I think you'd have to say that Radaglia got the points on it. But I'm going to give Nick Larkey a mulligan on it. He never kicks that poorly. Or if he does, it's once a season, So that's his one. Was still able to kick a goal in a game where he was really struggling, so I think that's nice to see at least. It was interesting, and I thought pretty funny listening to Sean Burgoyne and Jason Dunstall in the commentary kind of argue about his approach and the way it was going for him, because Sean Burgoyne was making the comment that he needs to kick through it. Jason Dunstall was talking about the fact that that's just not the way he kicks it. He does stab at it, and he does try to kick it just over the goal umpire. And I've got to go with Dunstall on this one. You could tell that Sean Burgoyne hasn't watched a lot of Nick Larkey, and that's okay. You can't be across every single player and their routines, because if you're Nick Larkey, you're not going away from what works from you what works for you just because you've missed it a couple of times in this game. You've got to go to your routine. That's the thing that's always going to work best for you. And so whilst it didn't work for him in this game, he was off. No doubt, he as someone in his position, you've got to back what works for you most of the time. So I back him in. I think he'll bounce back next week against Essendon. Yeah, no doubt he'll be disappointed with that performance, but it's not one that I'm going to hang him out to dry for, because he was battling his hardest. It wasn't for a lack of effort. He was absolutely trying. I think I've sort of touched on it a couple of times. We were our own worst enemies in that last quarter. Despite getting absolutely trounced in the clearances, I think it was sort of 8 or 9 to nothing at one point. we had momentum and we had several opportunities in front of goal that we just weren't quite able to convert. That's probably the disappointing thing from that last quarter is we did probably the hard work and weren't able to quite finish it. McKercher had more time than he thought when he snapped it. I thought Jabe could stand. He probably just needed to kick it off the ground rather than try and pick it up when it was in the goal square, and he sort of was pressured by Zach Butters and it went through for a behind. Cam Zerha also missed, a gettable opportunity. So if we were able to kick one or two of those, it would have really piled on the pressure and made the margin less than a goal, and potentially it's a different game then. And again, I guess for me, this is the sort of game that I think we're going to win when we're a slightly better side. For now, unfortunately, we have to live with a competitive performance, and after last week, I'll take it, but I'm not going to take it forever. I think this is the sort of game that you'd like to think that we'd be winning by now. And I know that things take time and eventually it's going to turn for us, but I think we've been feeling that for the last couple of years. And yeah, this is the sort of game that we just have to win. Not because of the opposition. I think Port Adelaide are a decent side, but when you get yourself into a position to win it like this, you've got the ball going your way, you've got it locked in your forward half for those longer periods, you have to take advantage of those opportunities, and the good sides would do that. So for me, it's an improvement on last week, and so it's a pass, but only just. A performance like this is not going to last forever. We've got to be better than this, I think, long term. Next thing, I did have some pre-game thoughts. I put it out on Twitter and Blue Sky. You can follow me at NorthPod Show if you're interested in seeing that. And I just put out some things that I was looking to see from this game on the back of a really poor Good Friday performance. I thought there was definitely some things that we needed to improve and to change. So one of those was that we had to be in the game at three-quarter time, and I think we can give that one a tick. We definitely were in the game at three-quarter time. Another was that we had to put pressure on Port Adelaide kicking inside 50. This is one I don't think we did consistently enough. I sort of spoke about the speed of ball movement was just too good for us at times. Mitch Georgiadis took 10 marks and Callum Dawson didn't do a whole lot wrong. So that says to me that we weren't putting enough pressure on up the ground. It wasn't through lack of trying. I just thought that their method was too good for us. But ultimately that's an area that we have to improve in general, is we've got to be able to put more pressure on across the ground, and we weren't quite able to do that in this game. I also said that I was looking for us to break even in contested possessions. We did that. We won at 148 to 130. What I would say, though, is at crucial times, it did go missing a little bit. So, for example, early in that last quarter, where Port Adelaide were able to get on top with their clearance work, we did fall behind in that stat in that period of the game. So, you just want those periods to disappear, I think, is a big thing. Ultimately, we won contested possession. Winning it by 18 is a pretty comfortable margin, so you have to take that as a tick, but you'd want to try and limit those momentum swings that the oppositions are able to have. And then the last thing was providing options up the field when exiting defensive 50, and this is probably the biggest negative for me, I think. We were still dump kicking it to a contest on the wing too often. So it's probably hard to be upset with the amount of improvement that we saw from last week, but I think it's worth remembering that Port Adelaide played well below their best too. It wasn't a case of us playing out of our skin and Adelaide matching it. It was more a case of us playing some okay football and Port Adelaide making some pretty glaring mistakes as well. So for me, it's an improvement, but we'd like to see it better. And that third quarter, it was like who can make the most mistakes. It was almost like watching that kind of performance. It was a crazy third quarter and sort of culminated in that Jason Horne-Francis, Tristan Xerri, Jai Simpkin moment or scuffle. So, look, I think this is where it's really hard to surmise how to feel coming out of that game, because we took some steps forward, we did some really nice things, but there was probably just a couple too many things that you'd like to see us improving on, and that's where the game is won and lost for us, unfortunately. A couple of other notes: Riley Hardeman came in, played his first full game for the year, and I thought, except for that missed tackle in the first quarter, had a really nice game. That's the sort of thing that maybe next year or the year after you'll see him stick that tackle because he's a bit stronger, a bit smarter, and able to position himself a little bit better. We just need to see more of him because he can kick it, he can defend, which is a tick for a defender. And I'm happy to have him kicking out from fullback and taking the game on. Of course, you're going to see some mistakes if he's doing that. We saw Finn O'Sullivan make a mistake doing that a couple of weeks back. But you've got to give your young players and your young defenders some confidence. So I'm happy seeing Caleb Daniel doing some of that kicking out. I'm happy seeing Riley Hardeman doing that as well. And hopefully we can see more of him in that halfback rebounding defender role, because the fact that he can do both is a real plus. We saw him have a really nice late spoil in the last quarter, which was important. He's got a bit of height about him. He's not tall, but at least he's not small. Whereas Caleb Daniel is a good defender for his size, but ultimately he can't compete in the air. Like, it's just not happening. So I think it was positive that we're able to get that game time into Riley Hardeman. Going back to, I guess, the tall defenders, it was interesting to me that we didn't really miss Aiden Corr and Griffin Logue. We played a lot of last year, or pretty much all of last year, without Griffin Logue, so probably that makes more sense. We're used to seeing a defence without him, but the fact that we didn't really miss Corr is interesting. I don't think that he would have done any better than Callum Dawson playing on Mitch Georgiadis. Like I mentioned, the service to him was pretty good, and he ended up with 10 marks and probably should have kicked 3 or 4 goals. But I don't know that much of that was due to Callum Dawson. I think when it was a 50-50 contest, Dawson pretty much split it. We were a little bit undersized. Finlayson came on as the sub, and that meant that Elmac had to play on him, who's certainly, playing outside of his weight division. But, we've seen McDonald do that from time to time. It's not something that's unfamiliar to him. And it probably just wasn't as bad as it might have been. Chom having to stand at Ollie Lord was not ideal. It meant that his intercepting impact was pretty limited. We didn't see him really getting involved from that perspective. But, I think it's interesting. We've had these big 2 omissions in Corr and Logue, and that's not where we lost the game. It wasn't our key tools or our key defenders getting out-muscled time and time again. So, look, interesting. Callum Dawson, I thought, was serviceable, but it wasn't the sort of performance that you'd look at and go, all right, lock him in for the year. By the same token, if we're able to keep developing him a little bit, like maybe this is not such a bad thing. So, look, one worth watching. I don't expect Corr and Logue to be rushed back in next week based on this performance, but potentially we just need one more that can play a taller role down back. Essendon have got Peter Wright. They've got Cole Langford, who I'll talk about in a minute. They've got Nate Caddy as well. So you'd think we're going to need another tall back there, but we also, neither Logue nor Corr are those super tall players. Like, Corr's a really nice size for Cole Langford, but probably out-muscled in that division. Anyway, just good food for thought, I think, because that's been an area of the ground that is not necessarily a strength for us. We did some changes, and I don't think it made us look worse. So an interesting one, thinking ahead to next week. And then I guess my last note here, there were a lot of free kicks. It was a free kick heavy game and a lot of 50-minute penalties. And I thought for the most part, we got the rub of the green and probably need to capitalise a little bit more on that. We did kick goals when it was taken straight to the goal square for us. So that's nice. But I think when it's going your way, you probably have to take a little bit more ground. The one I think back to is when we had the 50-minute penalty that Jacob Kidstani took, and he just bombed long to it wasn't to a contest even, it ended up being an uncontested mark for Port. They're the sorts of ones where you've got the opportunity to take the game forward and take it on with some speed. You can't afford to turn it over like that easily. So look, was that moment with Willie Rioli and Chom in that last quarter unfortunate? Absolutely, but I think broadly speaking, we probably got the rub of the green and weren't quite able to capitalise. So again, that's why we're possibly not able to win the game. And ultimately, we go down by 9 points. Looking ahead to next week, I mean, there's nothing to talk about from the VFL, a bye for them. So just looking ahead to the game against Essendon. So Thursday night game, it's a primetime game, Thursday the 1st of May, 7:30 p.m. against Essendon at Marvel. And it's a free-to-wear game against an opposition that is 3-3. They're not in strong form. They're in okay form. Always a big game against Essendon, but we simply have to continue the way that we played in this game and try to have less of those lapses. If we don't have that first quarter lapse, it's a different game. And I think, we could say that about so many of the moments that we've had over the past couple of years. I get that, but ultimately they're the things that we have to fix up. We're not yet a good enough side to have a major lapse and still win the game. I spoke about it earlier, that matchup on Cole Langford is going to be significant. He is deadly against us. He's one of those players that plays really well against us nearly every time. He's really strong. He's really mobile. So the matchup on him is going to be super important. I don't think that Callum Dawson is a good fit for that, but Who knows? I'm sure the coaching group will figure out what the best option for that is. We need someone like Cam Xerri to have a big impact. He's really struggled the last few weeks to get involved from a numbers perspective. He did end up still kicking 2 goals in this game, and he's taken advantage. It's not through lack of effort, but he's someone who has had big games against Essendon in the past, and I'd like to see him do that again. And we're going to need players like him to stand up if we're going to win. This is probably a winnable game for us. It's a sort of one that you look at, and no doubt we're going to go in as underdogs. We'll do that in most games this year, but it's an opposition that would be looking at it as an opportunity for them, and hopefully you can sort of surprise them and get the jump on them. That's what you have to hope. It is a shorter break, given we're playing Thursday night, but by the same token, Essendon played Friday night, or Friday evening, so it's not as though they've had heaps more preparation than us. The major difference probably is that it's a travel for us where we've been in Adelaide. So look, it is what it is. The week after we're playing Sunday, so you've kind of got to set yourself up for this Thursday game and then look ahead to the fact that you've got a big rest coming up. And hopefully we can have another competitive performance. You don't want to see us go back to having had a really bad primetime performance on Good Friday last week. We can't afford to have another bad primetime performance against Essendon. It's a massive game. They're rivals of ours. There's always a bit of something extra in a game like this. Hopefully we can turn it into a good result for us. That is going to do it for this podcast episode. Thank you so much for listening again. Hopefully you have a fantastic week, and it's not a long wait for our next game against Essendon on Thursday night. Let's hope we can put in a good performance. I will speak to you shortly after that game. As always, go Logue. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at NorthPodShow. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.